All the students of the academy silently looked at the indifferent prince sitting in the middle of the table and did not know what to say. The girls, including Situelan and Jean Wuxia, all felt a little wet on their backs. Such a meticulous but sharp person was really terrible. What's more, he used all the academy's classics and finally used the headmaster's scripture as the anchor. How could they still have the face to pester him? At this moment, the crowd finally understood why Prince Longqing, who was handsome and quiet and spoke little and gently, gave people an inexplicable sense of pride and indifference. This couldn't be entirely blamed on him for being arrogant. It was just that the people around him subconsciously felt that they were inferior in front of his great power. Over time, this talented prince got used to this way of getting along with others. Thus, he became the silent but proud person he was today. Before you complain that others always like to ride on your back, you should first consider whether you have taken the initiative to squat down. Ning Ke looked at his classmates in front of him, who were like frozen quails. He shook his head and said, "You are always so proud and unyielding in front of me, but today you are like a chicken after hitting an iron plate. How shameful." Sang Sang took the wine that he quietly handed to her and took a sip. She looked at the front and said, "It seems that Prince Longqing is very powerful." As if to answer the little handmaiden's doubts, Priest Moli, the deputy head of the Revelation Institute, looked at the students of the academy and added with great satisfaction, "Prince Longqing's way of debating is something that even the elders of the Lank Temple admire." The atmosphere was inevitably a little awkward. The middle-aged general from the Gushan commandery who was sitting on the lower left side of Li Yu suddenly laughed and said, "I, Zhang Jianxin, am a boorish man. I really don't understand what the prince and the child are talking about. But I know that any banquet must have wine to liven things up. Today, everyone is here to send off Crown Prince Chongming. I don't have anything good in the Gushan commandery, so I only brought dozens of bottles of Nine River double-distilled wine. I asked the captains to bring them to the backyard. Now, please have a taste." The Nine River double-distilled wine from the Gushan commandery was not an ordinary wine. It was a high-strength wine brewed by double distillation. This high-strength wine was used by an emperor of the Tang Empire to soften the minds of the grassland barbarians and corrupt the iron blood of the tribes. It had a miraculous effect. Since then, it had become a closely guarded secret craft of the Tang Empire. It was often used to bargain with the grassland tribes in negotiations and was rarely drunk by people. After a moment, he woke up and remembered that he was still holding the wine bowl, so he hurriedly brought it to his lips and drank it. However, when he just held the wine bowl to his lips, he found that Prince Longqing on the opposite table had already filled the second bowl of wine and drank it in a very natural and unrestrained manner. The third bowl, the fourth bowl, the fifth bowl. Even on the grassland, there was a legend that one could not get on after 3 bowls of the Gushan commandery's Nine River double-distilled liquor. Zhang Jianxin dared to invite a drinking competition, so he was naturally a master of this. However, facing Prince Longqing's calm and unwavering drinking, he finally could not resist and fell down with a red face. Maids and servants carried General Zhang, who reeked of alcohol, away. The Tang people in the courtyard felt very disgraced. It was extremely vulgar to invite a drinking competition, but in the end, it was drunk by this prince who looked like a figure in a painting. This was not only vulgar to the extreme, but also extremely shameful. Prince Longqing held the 8th bowl of liquor in his hand and did not put it down because of his opponent's drunkenness. He still drank it slowly and then looked at the people in the courtyard calmly. With a trace of deep exhaustion, he said with a smile, "In my life, I first worked hard to seek Taoism, then I took charge of judgment, killing the remnants of the devil's doctrine, punishing the traitors of Haotian Taoism, and punishing the heresy. I have never been soft-hearted, and I have strictly adhered to the laws of the divine canon. I never allowed myself to make mistakes. Up until now, it can be said that nothing can disturb my mind, except for one thing, and that is good wine. Wine can connect the way of heaven and man, and can penetrate the mysteries. It is a gift from Haotian, so I have always thought that if I use my own cultivation to overcome the effects of wine, it would be a reckless waste of God's gift. I have been fond of wine since I was a child, but I did not drink it often. Since I left capital Cheng when I was young. He calmly glanced at his elder brother, the crown prince, who seemed to be forgotten by the people in the courtyard, and continued. I have only drunk wine 4 times in these years, one of which was in the palace of Yueluan kingdom. Because of Chen Jia, I was misunderstood by some people, and they fought with me in rounds of drinking. The wine was not as strong as today, and they did not stop until all the wine jars in the palace were empty. After that, the pillars in the palace still had the smell of wine for 3 days, but I was not drunk. Good wine is the most wonderful thing, and it is also a demonic sound that erodes bones. So I rarely drink, unless there is a situation where I have to drink, such as in Yueluan kingdom, or today, when the general forced me to drink with the pain of the country. Why do you have to go against your will and act so arrogantly? Hearing this question, Prince Longqing was silent for a long time, and his handsome face gradually glowed. He slowly and firmly answered, there is no solution to the poverty of the country, so I can only be more arrogant. He said this very calmly, directly and frankly, clearly stating that the Yan kingdom was weak and not the enemy of the Tang Empire. And as a member of the royal family of the Yan kingdom and a person of the West Hill, if he were to be a hostage in Chang'an, then he should be arrogant, so that he would not be weak because of the situation, and always remain strong. Prince Longqing continued, as for not drinking, it has nothing to do with arrogance, but because I can't find anyone who can drink with me. Situilan could not help but whisper, a man's ability should be on the battlefield, not on the wine table. What's the use even if you can drink more wine? This lady's words make sense. Prince Longqing calmly replied, only those who are good at fighting can fight, and only those who are good at drinking can drink with each other. Since there is no fighting today, naturally there is no drinking. Among the young students present, who could fight with Prince Longqing? Xie Chengyun, who was the most popular in the academy, had already been defeated, so who could drink with Prince Longqing? He had already drunk nearly 10 bowls of strong wine, and he claimed that he was not drunk in his life. There was an awkward silence in the courtyard. The people present were shocked by the West Hill Divine Palace, and no one dared to challenge him. This was really an unbearable shame for the Tang Empire and the academy. Li Yu's jade-like hands gently grasped the silk scarf in her sleeves. When she was ready to leave, she suddenly heard a gurgling sound from the corner. At this time, it was so quiet that even a needle falling on the ground could be heard. So the gurgling sound, which was originally very subtle, was suddenly magnified and attracted the puzzled eyes of all the people present. The sound was like a clear spring flowing through the waterway opened by Nanzhu and falling into the slightly icy mountain stream. It was also like a long-necked stork waking up from the wetland grass in the morning and proudly combing its neck feathers. It was very beautiful and attractive. Everyone, including Situilan, opened their eyes wide and stared at Ning Ke in the dark corner. They carefully listened to the gurgling sound coming from behind him and were somewhat puzzled. A moment later, Sang Sang, who was thin and dressed in handmaiden clothes, came out from behind Ning Ke on her knees with an empty wine bowl in her hands. Then she was shocked to find that she had become the focus of attention. She did not know why everyone present was looking at her as if she was a fairy. Sang Sang found that so many eyes were staring at her, and felt extremely uncomfortable. She raised her right sleeve to wipe her mouth, and carefully put the wine bowl on the table in front of Ning Ke, and then quietly returned to behind Ning Quebec. Until then, people found that there were 4 wine cans neatly placed beside the table in the corner. Note, I saw that sentence in Mu Fei's Weibo and quoted from Gigi, but I forgot the specific words when I wrote it. So, I strongly call for recommendation votes on Monday. It's not easy for everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 146. After entering the courtyard, Ning Ke deliberately chose the darkest and most unobtrusive corner. However, he did not expect that no matter how low-key he was, the sound of Sang Sang drinking behind him still exposed his position like a firefly in the middle of the night. Facing dozens of complicated and shocked gazes, he was extremely uncomfortable. Especially when he saw the fiery gaze of the princess in the distance, he felt that something was wrong. He thought to himself, "Liu, you idiot, please don't drag me into this mess." Facing a fierce existence like Prince Longqing, no matter how talented I am, I can only be a fool. Ideals were always full, but reality was always harsh. There was always a gap between the two. The more you were afraid of something, the more it would come to you. The next moment, Ning Ke heard Princess Liu's deliberately cold question. "Ning Ke, have you finished the 4 jars of wine beside you?" Ning Ke glanced at the 4 small jars beside the table, scratched his head and replied, "I think so." Liu smiled and said, "Although they are small jars, 4 jars of wine is more than a dozen bowls of wine. How can you drink such strong wine? You are really a good-for-nothing." Ning Ke glanced at her from afar and thought, "Although I know that you like me very much even though you are scolding me on the surface, don't blame me for turning against you and taking Sang Sang away if you continue to say such words in front of so many people." Even though he thought so, he still answered honestly, "Sang Sang drank all of it. Sang Sang is only 13 years old. It is really beyond my expectation that she can drink so much strong wine." Liu gently turned the small wine cup between her fingers and said with a faint smile. She did not look at Prince Longqing, nor did she say a word to him, but everyone present knew the hidden meaning in her words. Only those who are good at fighting can fight? Only those who are good at drinking can drink? That little girl drank more than a dozen bowls of strong wine without collapsing. Is that considered a good drinker? Prince, are you going to lower yourself to drink a cup of wine with her? Priest Moli looked at Xiang Luo. With his strong eyesight, he could naturally see Sang Sang hiding behind Ning Ke wearing a handmaiden uniform. He asked unhappily, "Is that little girl also a student of the academy?" This matter could not be faked. The relationship between the academy students and Ning Ke was indifferent, even vaguely hostile. Someone answered, "That is Ning Ke's little handmaiden." Priest Moli flew into a rage and said, "Today's banquet is to send off the Crown Prince of Yen. Is so important. It is not easy for the academy students to attend. How can you let a little handmaiden mingle with you?" This anger was not pretentious, but was his real emotion. The West Hill Divine Kingdom had always been strict and valued. After being pulled out, Sang Sang hurriedly sat beside him and smoothed the front of her clothes. She lowered her head and did not want to meet those inexplicable gazes. She murmured in a very low voice, "How can I do that?" Ning Ke looked at Liu, who was at the top of the courtyard, and spread out his hands to show his helplessness. Liu smiled slightly and looked at the academy students present. She asked, "I wonder who is going to enter the course of magic skills on the 2nd floor of the academy this time? I wonder how your preparations are going." Her Highness had asked a question, so they naturally had to respond. Moreover, the students present had vaguely guessed the princess's good intentions. Therefore, no matter how shocked and curious they were, they could only look away from the corner. Sang Sang did not know what this meant. She only knew that no one was looking at her like that anymore. She became much more relaxed, and once she relaxed, the enchanting aroma of the wine from the wine jar became even more alluring. Looking at the full wine bowl in front of her and making sure that no one was paying attention, she hurriedly brought it to her lips with her 2 small hands and drank it in one gulp. Then, she wiped the wine stains on her lips with her sleeves and put her hands on her knees to show that she had done nothing. Prince Longqing, who was seated in the distance, did not seem to see this scene. His gaze fell on the floor not far in front of him, but for some reason, he laughed and drank the wine in one gulp. This was a strange banquet. It was a banquet to see off the Crown Prince of Yen, but the Crown Prince of Yen, who had been smiling gently and saying nothing, was forgotten. Her Highness and the Academy students seemed to be enthusiastically discussing the life of the Academy and the events of the day after tomorrow, but in fact, no one cared about the content of the conversation. Everyone's thoughts or glances fell on two places. The handsome Prince Longqing, who was as graceful as the Son of God, kept drinking the wine in his bowl in silence and thoughtfully. The tanned little handmaiden, who was as quiet as a little rabbit, kept drinking the wine in her bowl with her head down. It seemed that they were drinking to drown their sorrows, but the more Prince Longqing drank, the more solemn his expression became, and the more Song Song's eyes became brighter. The words and fragments of gazes floating in the air seemed to be intoxicated by the wine, quietly falling on these two places. No one seemed to notice, but in fact, everyone was paying attention. Because of the secret order, the boss of the Victory House personally moved more than 30 jars of double-distilled spirits from the Gushan Commandery to the backyard, and then placed them at the top and the corner respectively. Sang Sang had been soaked in the corpses and rainwater for too long when she was a baby, so her body was congenitally cold. Sometimes when the disease broke out, she could only rely on the strong wine to stimulate the heat in her body to survive, so Ning Ke habitually carried a wine bag with him. Since childhood, she had been relying on strong wine to sustain her life. She gradually fell in love with drinking, and gradually found that it was difficult for her to get drunk. It was just that the master and the handmaiden were too poor when they were young. Even the cheapest burnt grain wine in Min Mountain, or the worst horse milk wine in the grassland, could not be infinitely drunk. Especially she liked strong wine, and the stronger the wine, the more expensive it was. Even in Chang'an City, after the two suddenly became rich, they had never drunk as much as they did today. The wine was the Gushan Commandery Jiujiang double-distilled wine, the strongest wine in the world. Moreover, they could drink it all the time without spending money. For a poor girl like Sang Sang, this was undoubtedly the happiest enjoyment in the world. The wine jars beside the table were emptied one by one. She had completely forgotten that the purpose of her young master bringing her here today was to see that annoying prince. She had also forgotten what kind of occasion she was in, and how many people had stared at her before. She just felt happier and happier, and her willowy eyes became brighter and brighter. Prince Longqing was not slower than her in drinking. After a slight dignified look on his unparalleled handsome face, it gradually turned into some kind of interest and puzzlement, as well as a kind of hidden excitement and fervor that he had finally met his match. More than 30 jars of double-distilled spirits were finally drunk. Everyone in the field looked at those empty wine jars and thought that the spirits that were enough to make several horses drunk were actually drunk by these two people. They could not help but feel that it was extremely inconceivable. Prince Longqing did not use his cultivation to detoxify the wine. More than 10 jars of spirits finally made his inviolable cheeks, which were as awe-inspiring as the Son of God, loosen a little. His eyes were somewhat blurred and confused. But Sang Sang, who was sitting in the corner, only blushed a little, her abdomen slightly bulged, and her eyes became countless times brighter than usual. Other than that, she was as calm as usual, without a trace of drunkenness. Ning Ke glanced at Prince Longqing in the distance and glanced at Sang Sang beside him. He laughed and picked up his chopsticks to heavily knock on the wine jar. With a clear and crisp sound, it was the sound of victory. For a moment, the whole room was silent. The drunkenness in Prince Longqing's eyes gradually dissipated. He looked at the corner and expressionlessly asked, "Young man, are you Ning Ke?" Ning Ke stood up and answered, "Yes." "Is that your little handmaiden?" "Yes." "Reward?" Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at each other and saw no hesitation in each other's eyes. He smiled and respectfully replied, "Thank you for the reward, Your Highness." Prince Longqing calmly said a few words to the Taoist child behind him. The Taoist child from West Hill came forward and looked at Ning Ke standing in the corner with a gentle expression on his face. He said loudly in a tone as if he was bestowing a gift, "The prince is studying in Chang'an and is about to recruit people in his mansion. Today, Haotian gives you the honor and gives you the opportunity to offer your little handmaiden to serve his highness. Hurry up and thank him." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 147. At that time, servants and maids were like private property and could be disposed of at will. The situation in the Tang Empire was slightly better. The law of the Tang Empire strictly forbade the intentional injury of slaves, but it did not forbid the sale of slaves. It was not uncommon in Chang'an to give beautiful concubines and smart maids to them. And the gifts between the distinguished men were often legendary and beautiful. When the West Hill Taoist child said Prince Long Qing's words, no one present felt strange. Although the students of the academy, Huashanhua and other Tangs were somewhat disgusted by the Taoist child's arrogant and generous words, it was, after all, in line with the class difference between the two parties, so they remained silent. In the eyes of the crowd, little Sang Sang, who was standing beside Ning Ke, was only 13 or 14 years old. She was as thin as a bean sprout, with an ordinary appearance and dark skin. Prince Long Qing naturally did not want to take her back to his mansion to warm his bed because of her beauty, but because of the drinking competition. The bigwig of West Hill, who was high above, had taken a fancy to an inconspicuous little handmaiden in Chang'an because of the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, banquets, archery and so on. In the upper class, this was considered elegant. If Ning Ke was willing to give the little handmaiden to Prince Long Qing, the prince would naturally give him a generous gift in return. It might be another anecdote in the future. Therefore, no one felt shocked, strange or angry. Instead, some people, such as Zhong Dajuan, cast a faint look of envy at Ning Quebec. They secretly thought that if Ning Ke could gain Prince Long Qing's favor by gifting the little handmaiden, he would be able to gain a lot of benefits and convenience in the future. Princess Li Yu also remained silent at this time, but her silence had nothing to do with her demeanor. She was thinking about something that happened last year and looked at Ning Ke with a faint smile, knowing that this matter might develop in an interesting direction. In fact, after hearing the West Hill Taoist child's gentle and extremely generous announcement, Ning Ke was stunned for a long time before he figured out what the other party wanted to do. The reason why his reaction was so slow was that he had never thought that anyone would ask for Sang Sang from him in such an arrogant manner. Why? Sorry, there's no reason or reason. It's just because he's the high and mighty Prince Long Qing, a bigwig in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. He likes your little handmaiden and wants to have a little handmaiden to drink with him when he's bored. So you should send your handmaiden, who you've raised painstakingly and slept by the Kong bed for more than 10 years to him, and then smile and wait for the prince to reward you with money, a bright future, and some glory when he's happy? Because the scientific reasoning was actually unreasonable. Ning Ke's mood suddenly became extremely bad, but the smile on his face became brighter. He looked at the table in the distance and sighed, "Prince Long Qing, you are really beautiful." His reaction was very slow. Sang Sang, who was slow to react to many things, especially after drinking too much liquor today, reacted even slower than him. It was not until now that she realized that the prince at the banquet wanted to take her away from her young master. She couldn't help but frown and refute, "Young master, he looks ugly." Sang Sang had not thought, and as she had thought, as long as her. As, if master, as long, she would become. They only cared about Ning Ke's answer and had been quietly waiting for his answer. Most of them guessed that Ning Ke would agree, and a few of them thought that he would refuse. But no one expected that Ning Ke's answer had nothing to do with this matter. It seemed somewhat inexplicable. Prince Longqing, you are really beautiful. What does that mean? Note, Prince Longqing had just sobered up and was quietly looking at the empty wine jar on the table. Suddenly hearing this, he slightly frowned and raised his handsome face to look into the distance. He said indifferently, "Thank you, I know." "Since you know you are beautiful," Ning Ke looked at that place and said very seriously, "then don't be too optimistic." As soon as these words came out, the whole table was in an uproar. Even if the people present had thought that Ning Ke would refuse to send his little handmaiden, they also thought that he would use a very graceful way to refuse, such as saying that he was used to using this little handmaiden, that this little handmaiden came from a rough background, and so on and so forth. But they did not expect that he would refuse so simply, directly, crudely and fiercely. "You want my little handmaiden? You are too optimistic." Prince Longqing's face gradually darkened, but then he smiled a little. Ning Ke looked at him with a smile and explained, "The reason is very simple. Because I am not willing." Prince Longqing slowly stretched out his hands from his sleeves and calmly placed them on the table. He calmly looked at Ning Ke in the dark corner in the distance and slowly said, "Because you are not willing, you may have missed a lot." "I never worry about missing anything," Ning Ke replied. Prince Longqing's sharp eyes fell on his face from a very far distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "It may even be, my friendship?" Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and replied, "Maybe your friendship is not as valuable as you think." Hearing this, Prince Longqing's picturesque eyebrows seemed to be plated with a layer of frost. He said in a low voice, "It seems that you value your little handmaiden very much." Ning Ke replied with a smile, "What does it have to do with you?" Prince Longqing coldly said, "The master of the little handmaiden is really interesting. I am more and more interested in you." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Mix your interest with wine and drink it, if you can still drink." When the two were talking, it was quiet in the courtyard of the Victory House. Even the birds outside the Yenyu corridor were nervous and did not dare to make a sound. As the conversation went on, people's faces became more and more wonderful and strange. They never thought that Ning Ke, an ordinary academy student, could actually talk with the bigwig of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. Not only did he not lose the upper hand, but his words were extremely sarcastic and tough. Prince Longqing's expression was still calm, but everyone could see the burning emotion in his indifferent eyes and the tough meaning revealed in his words. Only he coldly asked, "But I am still very curious, in your mind, who is qualified to be the master of this little handmaiden?" Under this strong power, Ning Ke seemed to feel nothing. He slightly raised his eyebrows and replied, "In fact, this still has nothing to do with you. But since your highness is so interested, I can only say, at least you are not qualified." "If I am not qualified, then who is qualified?" Prince Longqing laughed loudly, but there was no joy in his laughter, only some kind of strong confidence and domineering. The laughter gradually stopped. He glanced at the silent Li Yu and asked, "Is it Her Highness?" Ning Ke smiled, and the dimple on his left cheek was particularly small and fresh. He said, "No, she is not." As soon as this sentence came out, there was another uproar. However, before these shocked and complicated emotions could ferment, Li Yu smiled and gave an answer. She looked at Prince Longqing and the others and said, "I have asked this guy for Sang Sang several times, but he did not care about me. So obviously I am not qualified. As for you, Prince Longqing, I think you are not more qualified than me." In the field, Prince Longqing and the people of West Hill and Yen had been in the upper hand for a long time. Li Yu had been silent and watching the chess game without saying a word. She was the most favored princess of the Tang Empire. Even if you were a peerless genius, a bigwig in the judicial department of West Hill, and a prince of Yen Kingdom, you were not qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as me. I did not care about Ning Ke's repeated rejection, so what right did you have to care? This was a very simple and powerful logic, which was the typical principle and style of the Tang people. The princess of the Tang Empire made a strong endorsement, and this little storm seemed to come to an end. Sang Sang pulled Ning Kei's sleeve and looked up, saying, "Young master, let's go home." Ning Kei smiled and nodded. However, everyone present, including Li Yu, did not expect that he did not leave. Instead, he reached out and rubbed Sang Sang's head. He looked at Prince Long Qing and said very seriously, "Prince, I have a few questions to ask you." Hearing this sentence, many people present thought of what Xie Qingyun had said when he stood up, and suddenly there was a silence. The academy looked at Ning Kei in shock, thinking that the third young master Xie had been defeated in the debate. Did this guy, who avoided the exam by claiming to be sick, want to make a big splash? Prince Long Qing's expression gradually became serious. He reached out to tidy up the front lapel of his clothes, sat up straight, and spread out his right hand, saying, "Please. Don't get me wrong. I have no interest in debating. In fact, I am not good at it. I am just a little confused about your previous confidence, so I have a few questions to ask you." Ning Kei took a step forward and asked, "Prince, may I ask if the firmament has eyes?" The clear blue sky was gray and cloudy, and snow was falling. How could there be eyes above the winter sky? Even the stars above the night sky could not be regarded as eyes, right? However, although Ning Kei said it was not debating, Prince Long Qing still responded very cautiously. After a little thought, he understood what Ning Kei meant. Haotian lived above the firmament, and looked down on millions of people with compassion and benevolence. Then, the firmament naturally has eyes. Ning Kei then asked, "Is there primordial qi between heaven and earth?" Prince Long Qing replied, "Of course there is." Ning Kei quickly asked the next question, "Is there any regularity in the fluctuation of primordial qi?" Prince Long Qing replied, "Yes." "Does the locust tree have roots?" "Yes." "Does the milkworm have life?" "Yes." "Does a normal person have thoughts?" "Yes." "Does the Tang Empire have an emperor?" "Yes." "Does the West Hill have doctrines?" "Yes." Ning Kei asked the questions faster and faster, but these questions were indeed very simple and had nothing to do with the debate. Prince Long Qing answered faster and faster as well. Their questions and answers were as quick as frying beans. The crowd became more and more confused about what he wanted to do. At this moment, they heard Ning Kei's next question. "Are there holes in the socks?" Of course, Prince Long Qing suddenly raised his eyebrows and stopped talking. Then he looked at Ning Kei standing in the field with a faint smile, as if he was looking at a pitiful worm whose cleverness had been crushed. He continued to answer in an indifferent tone, "No." This series of questions was dull and even boring. But because it was related to Prince Long Qing and the previous storm, everyone listened very carefully. When Ning Kei asked the questions, all the students thought along with him and silently answered with Prince Long Qing in their hearts. When the last question appeared, they even directly answered "yes" in their hearts. After a moment of silence, he replied with a smile, "Your Highness, your words are unreasonable. At least I believe that Prince Long Qing will think that I am presumptuous enough today." Thinking of Prince Long Qing's gloomy face, Li Yu felt refreshed as if she had been washed by the spring breeze. She looked at Ning Kei with satisfaction and then at Sang Sang beside him. She praised, "You did well today. But, you are not afraid of offending the Yen Kingdom's subjects and the West Hill Divine Palace just because of a temporary dispute. You are much more courageous than before. To be honest, it is not like your original temperament." This was a seemingly ordinary but sharp question. Only those who had been in contact with Ning Kei knew that this soldier from the border town had always cared more about benefits, such as life and death. He had never cared about fame or humiliation. At this time, Ning Ke recalled his previous tough and sharp words at the banquet and found it somewhat interesting. He smiled and shook his head, explaining, "I don't know why, but I'm very unhappy when I see Prince Longqing's behavior. When the little Taoist boy said those words, I really wanted to flip the table and kill him, but... Your Highness, you also know that I'm not capable of killing him, so I can only stab him a few times to get some interest." "This is just the interest," Li Yu said with a smile. Then she thought of the big event the day after tomorrow and the Yan Kingdom's Crown Prince Chongming, who seemed to be forgotten today. She gradually stopped smiling and looked at Ning Ke seriously. After a long silence, she said in a low voice, "This year, only one person can enter the second floor. That person, could it be you?" Ning Ke looked at the serious look of the woman in the window and did not know how to answer. "I don't care what the West Hill Divine Palace and the Yan Kingdom are thinking. I also don't care what agreement the Imperial Court has reached with them. I only know that I really don't want to see Prince Longqing enter the second floor." Li Yu stared into his eyes and said. Ning Ke looked back into her eyes and spread his hands helplessly. He said, "Prince Longqing is a cultivator standing on the threshold of knowing destiny state and a bigwig of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. And I am just an ordinary student of the academy. Don't you think too highly of me if your Highness expects me to be an obstacle on his path to glory?" The light in Li Yu's eyes gradually faded. She looked at Ning Ke's clean and fresh but still ordinary face and thought that she was really out of her mind. How could she have thought of pinning her hopes on this guy? She could not help but laugh at herself. She stretched out her hand through the window and gently pinched Song Song's cheek. She praised, "You are much more capable than your young master." His two tightened eyebrows under his smooth forehead suddenly raised, and he whispered, "In fact, those who can enter the second floor are not necessarily geniuses in cultivation. Sixth brother is a good blacksmith born from a good blacksmith." Ning Ke suddenly opened his eyes. Chen Pippi didn't look at him, and continued to frown. The headmaster of the academy values a student's temperament the most. Every time the second floor opens, although the examination methods are different, they are all the same. So no matter how the examination is tomorrow, the first thing you have to do is to stay true to yourself and do this to the extreme. Then you may have a chance. The extreme? Ning Ke thoughtfully said to himself. It's late. Let's go back. Chen Pippi glanced at the spring night stars outside the west window and said, "There are only a few hours left before the second floor opens." After returning to the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street, Ning Ke couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling above his head. His seemingly calm eyes actually hid nervousness and confusion, and his body also seemed a little tense because of nervousness. Even he himself couldn't explain why he had such a strong desire to enter the second floor of the academy. Perhaps it was because of the infinite yearning for the cultivation world since childhood. Years of hard work like last year when he kept coughing up blood to climb the stairs made every cell in his body love that world more and more. More because he finally stepped into that magical world last year and saw more strange scenery, he increasingly wanted to see more scenery. When people went through hardships to climb a dangerous peak and looked up, they would see a faintly higher peak among the white clouds in the distance. If they could overcome their fatigue, then they would always want to go to the higher peak and see more beautiful scenery that they had never seen before. Climbing the city tower to see the mountain scenery, climbing the high mountain to see the city scenery, sitting on the clouds to see the scenery of the world. This was what a worthwhile life should be like. Sang Sang sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his cheek. She held his hand with a little force, trying to pass some kind of strength to him. There was a forced but sincere smile on her dark face, trying to pass some kind of confidence to him. On this night in the spring of the 14th year of Tianqi era, the whole Chang and city and even the whole world were paying attention to the opening of the second floor of the academy tomorrow. But no one knew how important this matter was to the ordinary lad who had been cruelly judged to be unable to cultivate since childhood, living in the back house of the shabby bookstore in the eastern city of Chang'an. Written on my birthday, revised on 201112102132. I spent this birthday alone in the hotel. It's a legend. I'll remember it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Ning Ke was about to say something, but he did not expect to hear a sentence that shocked him. If you give up on entering the second floor today, I can introduce you to a strong person who is no weaker than Lu Bai. It was quiet in the forest. Ning Ke looked at the female professor's calm face and realized that her tone when she said this was so casual and normal. It was as if she was saying that if he did not want to eat fruit pancakes, she would make him a bowl of sesame paste noodles. She did not show off, but there was an unquestionable meaning. However, the sage of Sword of South Jin Kingdom, Lu Bai, was recognized as the most powerful person in the world. She wanted to introduce a strong person who was no weaker than Lu Bai to be his teacher. Where could he find such a person in the world? How did the female professor know him? Ning Ke was so shocked that he could not speak for a long time. He did not know why he trusted the female professor's promise. However, he did not know why when he opened his mouth with difficulty, the answer was no. I still want to, give it a try. I want to see if I can enter the second floor. The female professor's eyes were filled with an interesting smile. She looked at him and asked, why? After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said hesitantly, I don't know why either. I just feel that I've been working so hard on this matter for so long. If I don't give it a try, I won't be satisfied. That's all? The female professor looked into his eyes quietly. Ning Ke scratched his head and replied awkwardly, because I really want to enter the second floor to have a look. The female professor looked at the awkward expression on his face and suddenly smiled sweetly. She said with a smile, thinking is the key. As long as a person wants to do something, they can usually do it. A person's thinking, or ambition, has always been the most beautiful thing in this world. You've made the right choice by persevering. I told you last time that these trees are like swords inserted into the earth. If you can pull these trees out, they will be swords piercing into the sky. A person's persistence is self, and self is the sword in your hand. It's just a pity. She turned and walked out of the sword forest, leaving behind a sigh. Ning Ke did not understand what she meant. He thought nervously, does the female professor mean that even though I have a good foundation and will, I am still no match for Prince Longqing? Looking at the slim figure that was gradually disappearing at the edge of the sword forest, he suddenly asked, Sir, you said that if I don't enter the second floor, you will introduce me to a teacher. Is that true? The female professor did not turn back and replied calmly, Of course it is true. Ning Ke raised his hand to cover his forehead and asked with a smile, Can I regret it now? The female professor replied with a smile, I have given you a chance. People could clearly see the not-so-rugged mountain path at the foot of the mountain when they stood on the stone ground of the academy. It was quiet, and no one spoke. Time ticked by, but no one walked towards the mountain. It seems that I have to go first. In the dead silence caused by the tension, a person's voice suddenly sounded. To everyone's surprise, the first to climb the mountain and move towards the second floor of the academy was not a student of the academy, nor was it Prince Longqing, who was regarded as the son of God by all the believers of Haotian Taoism. It was a young monk. The monk was about 20 years old and had a handsome appearance. He wore a tattered but clean monk's robe and a pair of straw sandals. The edges of the straw sandals were almost rotting away. One could imagine how many barren hills and treacherous rivers these shoes had accompanied him through. However, if one looked closely, one could see that there was not a single speck of dirt on his feet. His feet were as white as a lotus. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Looking at Linchuan Wangying and his classmates, he said forcefully, "This is our academy. Do we have to be the last to go up the mountain?" A happy smile appeared on Wang Ying's young face. He cupped his hands and said, "Brother Xia, I'll go with you." The academy students were excited and began to cheer softly. They lined the path to see the 6 students of course of magic skills off. The slight uproar of the academy students only attracted some curious gazes. As for the Westhill Divine Palace and the Yen Kingdom envoys gathered under the umbrella, no one looked at them. The eyes of everyone under the umbrella and even many people outside the umbrella were still fixed on Prince Longqing, who was as beautiful and calm as a peach blossom in winter. The small disturbance in the Victory House the day before had gradually spread. Many people knew that Prince Longqing, who was solemn and powerful in the judicial department of the Divine Hall, had suffered a small loss in the hands of an ordinary student of the academy. However, those who knew the inside story knew that it was just some trivial things like drinking and talking. These things could not affect Prince Longqing's position in their hearts. As long as Prince Longqing had not really been defeated, he was still the perfect son of God. Since the beginning of the academy professor's announcement, some young cultivators had walked to the back of the academy. However, Prince Longqing had been silent. His eyes were as calm as a still pond, and he had been focused on the air in front of him. "Longqing, when could you be affected by such a small figure?" Prince Longqing suddenly curled his lips and said silently in his heart. Then, he glanced at the guy hiding in the corner outside the crowd with his emotionless eyes, and then slowly stood up. It was just a very simple action of standing up, but it caused a burst of excitement and discussion among the crowd. Prince Longqing is going to start climbing the mountain. Will he be the one who climbs the highest? Of course. He is a powerhouse in the upper see-through state. I even believe that he will directly climb to the top. Speaking of which, he is already a bigwig in the judicial department of the Divine Hall, but he still wants to participate in the examination of the 2nd floor of the academy. The academy is really too arrogant. Can't they directly give him a place? I suspect that the academy and the Tang Empire want to take this opportunity to shock the Westhill Divine Palace. With so many pairs of eyes watching, can the academy play tricks during the process of climbing the mountain? How can the headmaster of the academy play tricks when recruiting disciples? Those who think so are really stupid. The whispered discussions entered Prince Longqing's ears very clearly, but there was still no expression on his perfect face, as if he did not hear it at all. Chapter 152. Every time they lifted their feet or waved their arms, it was as if they had to use all their strength. The young people walking on the stone path at the back of the academy were like puppets being carried by cotton strings. Although they could not see their expressions, the people in the academy could clearly feel the pain they were suffering. The 2nd floor's method of selecting students was actually this simple, but behind the simplicity, there was such a miracle. The outstanding young cultivators from all over the world would become clumsy puppets once they stepped on the slanting stone path. It was a shocking scene. No one could guess what had happened on the mountain path except for the people involved. Even Priest Moli, who had been immersed in the cultivation world for many years, did not dare to guess before experiencing it for himself. But everyone believed that the academy would not let these young people be really hurt. Looking at the monotonous scene for a long time, it was inevitable that it would be boring. Looking at the movements of the crowd around the academy, it was unlikely that anyone would try to climb the back of the academy. The bigwigs, including the envoys from various countries, relaxed a little. They began to look left and right under the shade of the umbrellas, talking to others. The academy had prepared some simple food, and the bigwigs had brought their own maidservants. Tea and snacks were placed on the table for a while, adding to the excitement of the conversation. The main targets of the envoys from various countries were Prince Li Peiyan, Princess Li Yu, and Priest Moli, the deputy headmaster of the Revelation Institute. The surrounding countries had always been very gentle and subservient to the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, which no other power dared to oppose. As for which side to submit to, it was not their focus at all. At least for now, this submission had to be on both sides. Other than building a good relationship with the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, the most important reason for the envoys from various countries to come to the academy today was to see if there were any young people from their countries who were lucky enough to enter the second floor. Even if no one could enter the second floor, as long as there was a real talent in cultivation, they would pay attention to it on behalf of their respective imperial courts. The envoy from the Great River Kingdom was chatting with a deacon from the West Hill Divine Palace beside him. He perfectly hid his humility between laughter and exquisite flattery. Suddenly, he saw the earth dragon coming from afar, and his expression changed. He stood up abruptly and looked in that direction, trembling. "What's going on?" The so-called earthen dragons were actually 4 deacons of the academy carrying stretchers. Because they were moving so fast, their boots broke the grass and kicked up the soil. That was why there was a cloud of dust and the momentum of flying dragons flying close to the ground. The 4 deacons of the academy carried the stretchers from afar and arrived at the front yard in no time. They were not out of breath and their faces were not flushed. They looked extremely calm. It could be seen that they had done this many times over the years. The envoy from the Great River Kingdom covered his forehead and looked incredulously at the unconscious young cultivator from the Great River Kingdom on the stretcher. He sighed repeatedly. He had never thought that the first person to be defeated in the examination of the second floor of the academy would be a citizen of his country. The real reason why he was depressed was that he did not know how he was defeated. The envoy walked to the stretcher and asked angrily, "How did climbing up the mountain make him faint?" An academy deacon beside the stretcher answered expressionlessly, "Fainting is a common thing in the academy. He would vomit blood even when climbing up the stairs, let alone climbing up the mountain. Please move aside." The deacon of the academy rudely pushed away the envoy of the Great River Kingdom, carried the stretcher and continued to run to the back of the academy, leaving behind a yellow earthen dragon and a few unclear complaints. "Move aside. Boil the water." The 4 academy deacons carried the second climber back on the stretcher. There were instructors of the academy waiting with ginger soup and medicine. "Move aside. There must be a lot of boiling water today. Don't block the way." The academy deacon returned again with the handle of the stretcher in his hand. Their shouts to clear the way were definitely more colorful than the shouts of the Tang officials when they went out. Seeing this scene, Chu Yuxian could not help but look back at Ning Ke as he recalled the scenes from last year. Ning Ke looked at the 4 deacons running back and forth between the back of the mountain and the front yard and opened his mouth slightly. This scene was very familiar to him and even a little warm. However, the experience of climbing up the stairs last year was after all a pain that made his fingers tremble and his chest and abdomen gave birth to some nausea. His face was slightly pale and he sighed painfully. "It's still the 4 of you." In the area not covered by clouds and mist in the back of the mountain of the academy, the young cultivators on the stone path walked slower and slower. From time to time, someone fainted in pain and was quickly carried away. Xia Chengyun walked in the middle. Although it was difficult, he still persisted. The young monk from the Yueluan kingdom seemed to be relatively relaxed. His tattered frock fluttered in the mountain wind. He walked at the front of the team and looked around from time to time. It seemed that he was not looking for scenery but more like he was looking for a way out. Prince Longqing held his hands behind his back and climbed up the mountain to look at the scenery. He walked leisurely all the way and constantly passed the climbers in front of him. There was no pride or contempt on his face. He was only calm no matter how many people he passed or how many young cultivators he saw by the mountain path. Even when he passed the young monk, he did not look at him with the corner of his eyes. There was a thick fog at the end of the mountain path. The people who stayed in the academy were silent. They looked at the slanting mountain path in the distance, puzzled and shocked by the magic of the mountain path. They wondered what kind of inhibition the academy had set there that could make it so difficult and painful for these outstanding young cultivators from various countries to walk. Ning Ke, who stood in the corner, was also thinking and analyzing. But his focus was not on the mountain path, but the thick fog at the end of the mountain path. Prince Longqing had already arrived in front of the fog. If he wanted to climb the mountain later, he had to at least enter the fog. Since that was the case, no matter how dangerous the sloping mountain path was, it had nothing to do with him. He had to go through it. Prince Longqing came to the front of the thick fog that covered the mountainside. Without any hesitation, he calmly walked in. After a while, the young monk from the Yueluan kingdom, who looked around curiously, also came to the fog. Looking at the clouds and mist in front of him that hid an unknown number of ancient trees and mountain souls of tens of thousands of years old, the young monk, who had always appeared to be indifferent, had an unprecedentedly serious expression on his face. He looked at the mist quietly and did not take a step forward. Prince Longqing disappeared in the mountain fog. For a long time, no one else could walk through the stone path at the mountainside and into the fog. Half of the climbers who wanted to enter the second floor of the academy had been carried back by the 4 deacons. Only Xie Qingyun and a few others were still climbing the lower part of the mountain path with difficulty. As for the young monk from the Yueluan kingdom, who had shown a good state and was placed high hopes by some people, he seemed to have encountered some kind of problem and hesitated to move forward. Looking at the current situation, the people in the academy who were watching the ascent had already made a judgment in their hearts that no one could defeat Prince Longqing. Although this was expected by many, they still could not help but be shocked and speechless when they saw the scene unfold and Prince Longqing's strength that far surpassed his peers. The West Hill Divine Palace is indeed the ancestor of all cultivation sects and a place respected by the common people. The Revelation Institute is indeed a wonderful place of metaphysics in the world. Even if he comes back, he may not be a match for Longqing. Is he not as good as Longqing, or do you not want him to be like Longqing? Li Yu's lips curled up slightly and she said mockingly, "Uncle, didn't you come here personally to see Prince Longqing enter the second floor, so that you can rest assured?" Li Peiyan replied calmly, "You have to know that this is His Majesty's will." Hearing this, Li Yu was silent. Today, when the second floor opened, Prince Longqing entered first as expected. Although this was an agreement between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, as the princess of the Tang Empire, she could not help but feel extremely unhappy when she thought of the words of the envoy from the Yen Kingdom and saw the unfathomable expression of Priest Moli. However, as previously discussed, Wang Jinglu had not returned, and the students of the academy were not strong enough. Who could win back some face for the Tang Empire? She subconsciously glanced at the silent students of the academy. However, even she herself did not know who she was looking for, or which faces of the students of the academy she was trying to find the last glimmer of hope and brilliance. In the old library in the depths of the academy, the window facing the west had been pushed open. When the spring breeze, accompanied by the fragrance of flowers, entered the building, the figure of a chubby lad appeared by the window. Outstanding young cultivators from all over the world had previously passed by the old library, but neither Prince Longqing nor the young monk had noticed him by the window upstairs. Chen Pipi's eyes flew over the square eaves of the study room above the wetland and fell on Ning Kai, who was in the dark corner of the stone platform. He took a bite of the cold bun in his hand and mumbled to himself, "How long are you going to wait?" On the meadow outside the academy, Sang Sang had already opened the big black umbrella. She stood in the shadow in silence and occasionally looked up at the dazzling white sunlight in the blue sky to confirm the time. Then she quickly took out the sunscreen lotion from Chenjinji Cosmetic Store and sprayed it on her face. Then she spread it evenly with her small hands and rubbed it to the bottom of her muscles. She knew that the test to enter the second floor of the academy was to climb the mountain. She knew that her young master would definitely climb the mountain. Since that was the case, there was no need for her to be anxious. Why must he be the last to set off, and then continuously surpass others along the way to become the first to climb the mountain? This prince is really pretentious and hateful. Chu Yuxian took out the exquisite pastries wrapped in a handkerchief and took a piece for himself. Then he handed the rest to Ning Kai for him to eat. Ning Kai thought to himself, if the last to climb the mountain is pretentious and hateful, then what kind of person am I? Chapter 153. The hero was always the last one to appear. On the battlefield filled with yellow sand, several deputy generals fought for a long time with knives, but they could do nothing to each other or were beaten back by the other. Then, a silver-robed young general suddenly pulled the reins and rushed over. With a spear, he knocked all the enemies off their horses, and then stood in the wilderness with his spear in hand. The twilight shone on his face, making him look extremely cool and pretentious. In the dark and rainy streets, the underlings of the gang slashed at each other with watermelon knives. The blood was more violent and dense than the rain. From the west to the south, there were dozens of corpses lying messily on the ground. Then, the black-robed Jianghu Bigshot, holding a steel knife, shouted and waved it. It was like a blood dragon, killing from one end to the other. No one could withstand his knife, and no one could survive under his feet. He was extremely powerful. As for why the silver-robed young general and the black-robed Bigshot didn't make a move at the beginning, but waited for their subordinates and underlings to shed blood and be miserable for a long time before they stepped out? Of course, it wasn't because they were like storytellers who habitually procrastinated. Instead, it was because these pretentious criminals knew that only by enduring for a long period of time would they be able to show off their elegance at the end. After the opening of the second floor, many people began to climb the mountain one after another, including Prince Longqing, who had already set off. However, Ning Kai did not move at all. He stood silently in the corner and waited for this moment. He could explain that he did not move because he wanted to observe the young cultivators and analyze the possible problems they might encounter when climbing the mountain. But deep down in his heart, he had to admit that the more important reason was that those climbers who were struggling on the sloping mountain path were not his subordinates, nor were they his deputy generals. He did not care about those people's lives. Since he had no confidence in entering the second floor, why not enjoy the pleasure of being the last to make an appearance? The hero was always the last one to appear. Even if the hero was still the superior and inhumanly perfect Prince Longqing, at least at this moment, the last one to appear was undoubtedly the hero of the moment. Ning Kai's idea was perfectly realized. When he took the pastries wrapped in Chu Yuxian's handkerchief and slowly walked towards the back of the academy, countless pairs of eyes around the courtyard were attracted to his figure. Those gazes were filled with countless complicated emotions. Some were surprised, some were confused, but most of them were confused. It had been a long time since the opening of the second floor. Anyone with eyes could see that Prince Longqing would definitely win today. At this moment, How could someone be so ungrateful as to disturb the solemn and sacred scene of Prince Long Qing waiting for him to shine? He seems to be a student of the academy. The envoy of the Great River Kingdom looked at Ning Kei's clothes and frowned. Is he a hidden powerhouse of the academy? The 6 students of the course of magic skills are all on the mountain. 4 of them have already been carried back. Looking at the shocked faces of the instructors, they don't seem to know what's going on either. Among the students of the academy, Zhong Dajuan suppressed his shock and looked at the back of Ning Kei, who was the center of the discussion. He sneered and said, "What is he up to this time? Hasn't he been humiliated enough this year?" Situilan subconsciously took a step forward and clenched her hands in her sleeves. She looked at Ning Kei in front of her, her face full of curiosity and worry. Although she knew that Ning Kei was not as useless and despicable as his classmates said, she really couldn't understand why he wanted to climb the mountain at this time. She also couldn't figure out why he believed that he would have the opportunity to enter the 2nd floor of the academy. Under the broad golden parasol, Li Yu looked at the young man who was not strange, but also not very familiar. She revealed a thoughtful expression. She recalled the scenes on the journey back from the grassland last year, and recalled the old man Liu Qingshan's smile and resolute words. She did not know why she had such strong confidence and hope in him, but she did not know where this confidence and hope came from. Li Peiyan followed her gaze and looked at Ning Kei with a serious and cold expression. As a prince of the Tang Empire, he was very willing to see a young man of the Tang Empire in the academy stand up and win back some face for the empire. But he did not want this event to have too many variables. Priest Moli did not think that Ning Kei was qualified to be a variable. He lightly glanced at him and no longer cared. At this time, Prince Long Qing had already entered the thick fog on the mountainside. Perhaps he would succeed in the next moment. In his view, whether this student stood up at this time to play to the gallery or was instructed by someone in the academy, it would only make the West Hill divine glory and the prince more perfect. For those who were not strong-willed and easily shaken, gazes were heavy, especially when there were so many bigwigs around the academy's stone platform. If they gathered on one person, it could even crush a thin student. But for Ning Kei, the gazes of others were the most weightless and powerless existence in the world, no matter how many gazes gathered together. What he was going to do had nothing to do with these people, so the emotions in these gazes had nothing to do with him. The academy professor who was responsible for presiding over the opening ceremony of the 2nd floor stood expressionlessly beside the stone platform. He had already heard the instructor's introduction and knew that Ning Kei was a student of the academy. He also knew the rumors about this person this year. Why? The professor asked. Ning Kei honestly smiled and asked with hands folded in front, "Not allowed?" "I didn't hear about the registration time limit you mentioned before." "Indeed not. I just heard that you pretended to be sick and gave up the semester exam last year because you were afraid of losing to your competitors. So I don't understand why you want to climb the mountain today. If giving up the exam and climbing the mountain are logically contradictory." Ning Kei looked at the professor and calmly explained, "Then I dare to climb the mountain today, which means that the rumors in the academy and the accusations against me are all false." Looking at this ordinary student who dared to speak in front of him, the professor smiled slightly. His 2 silver-stained eyebrows fluttered in the spring breeze, and he looked quite happy. But he did not step aside. Instead, he continued to ask with a trace of interest, "But I still want to know why you want to climb the mountain today." Ning Kei answered with a smile, "If those people from the West Hill Divine Palace or the envoys from the Yen Kingdom asked me, I would definitely give them an answer that would shock them all. But since it's you, of course, I have to answer honestly. I want to climb the mountain because I want to." The professor laughed and stroked his white beard. He shook his head and praised, "What a good answer. This is the best answer I've heard in the past few years." Then he curiously asked, "If the people who asked you were those charlatans from the West Hill or those fence-sitters from the Yen Kingdom, how would you answer?" If they asked me why I want to climb the mountain, would say, Ning Ke smiled a little embarrassedly and said, because the mountain is there. The academy professor was stunned and his fingers that were stroking his beard slightly stiffened. Then he laughed out loud and looked at Ning Ke as if he was a promising student. He praised, this is also a good answer. Go. The professor smiled and said, it's just that the mountain path is dangerous and rugged. If you suddenly feel that you don't want to climb any further halfway, then you can come down. If anyone dares to mock you, I will stand up for you. Ning Ke smiled and bowed deeply to the ground. Then he left. The professor watched him walk into the quiet alley and stroked his beard. He thought that this year's academy students were really not all good-for-nothings and nodded with satisfaction. Ning Ke was very familiar with the road up the mountain, at least he was familiar with the part of the road before going up. If one looked carefully, one could probably make out that the lines under the thick moss were actually some large characters carved on the stone. However, the strokes of the characters were painted in cinnabar red, and after countless years of wind and rain, they had long faded away. What a powerful psyche power attack! These are also the words left by the divine talisman master. Ning Ke stared at the stone engravings on the cliff in the forest, and his hands hanging beside him slightly trembled. At this moment, there were hundreds of thousands of invisible steel needles piercing through his soles. If ordinary people encountered such pain, they might have already fallen to the ground and cried out in pain. However, although his face was pale and his hands trembled, he was abnormally clear-headed, as if the pain had no effect on him. Previously in the academy, Ning Ke looked at the mountain path from afar and saw Xie Chengyun and others walking extremely slowly on the mountain path with great difficulty. Although he could not see their expressions, he could vaguely perceive their pain. Then he guessed what kind of inhibition was on the mountain path. But he did not expect that the assessment of the second floor of the academy was so overbearing and barbaric that such a powerful divine talisman was used at the beginning. Now he finally understood why those outstanding young cultivators from all over the world would become puppets on this mountain path and walk so slowly and with great difficulty. Under the wonderful divine talisman on the cliff, any natural environment around the mountain path could become a danger to prevent people from climbing the mountain. You could not avoid it and could only break through by force. Ning Ke frowned tightly and looked at his right foot that had landed on the pebbled mountain path. Suddenly, he smiled nervously and exerted strength in his waist and abdomen. He leaned forward and lifted his left foot that had fallen behind him and stepped on the pebbled mountain path. He stepped heavily and hard, as if he was going to break the mountain path paved with pebbles. Countless invisible needles poked out from the cracks of the pebbles and pierced deep into the soles of his feet through the hard soles of his boots. The instant numbness was quickly replaced by extreme pain, and then it was clearly transmitted into his brain. Ning Ke's face became paler, but his frowning brows gradually relaxed. He took a deep breath as if he enjoyed it, and then waved his hands and continued to walk forward. Intentionally or unintentionally, attentively or stealthily looking at Ning Ke from the corner of their eyes, genuinely concerned or just curious, or with a mocking attitude, when Ning Ke appeared on the mountain path, many people looked at him and began to pay attention to his every move. Seeing Ning Ke step on the mountain path and fall to the ground after taking a step, some people could not help but shake their heads, and some people laughed mockingly. Priest Moli was talking indifferently with the envoy of the Yen kingdom, and it seemed that he did not care about what happened on the mountain path at all. But after seeing Ning Ke fall, he could not help but shake his head contemptuously. After watching for such a long time, he could vaguely guess what kind of inhibition the academy had set on the mountain path. At this time, seeing that Ning Ke was so badly suppressed by the talisman power, he was sure that Ning Ke was at most in the no-doubt state. No-doubt state? It was probably a good level in the academy's course of magic skills. But with such a state, he wanted to make a big splash after enduring for so many days? That was too wishful thinking. Among the students of the academy, Zhong Dajuan pointed at the mountain path and sneered, "Playing to the gallery is just playing to the gallery. He only wants to attract attention, but he doesn't think about how much damage this will bring to the academy's reputation." Situilan could not help but gasp when she saw Ning Ke fall down on the mountain road. Hearing this mockery, she could not help but glare at him angrily. She took Jin Wucai's little hand and took 2 steps forward, pulling the distance between them and the academy students further. "Your hand is a little cold." Jin Wucai looked at her worriedly and said. Although the granddaughter of the chancellor was more worried about Xie Chengyun, who was still struggling on the mountain path, she was still worried about her female companion, because it seemed that Ning Ke did not have any chance. "It's okay. I just can't bear to see some people's faces." Situilan glanced at the classmates who were talking behind her and sneered, "Even if Ning Ke can only take 1 step on the mountain path, he is still better than these people who dare not even try." Jin Wucai looked at the mountain path in the distant forest and said worriedly, "But it seems that Ning Ke can't take a second step." Situilan did not answer her, but just focused on the mountain path, silently cheering for the long-forgotten friend of the academy in her heart. Suddenly, a look of surprise appeared on her beautiful cheeks. She pointed to the distance and jumped up, shouting, "Look! Look! Ning Ke is starting to walk." Many people in the academy noticed what happened on the mountain path. They saw Ning Ke climb up with difficulty, paused for a moment, and moved his left foot to take a step forward. Then Ning Ke took the 2nd step, the 3rd step, and the 4th step. Although it was obvious that his body was trembling and his walking speed was very slow, it could be felt that he was walking more and more steadily, as if each step would deeply step into the hard mountain path. Someone among the academy students let out a cry of surprise. Then the sea stood up. The seawater, as dark as ink, stood up like a wall, no, like the earth. The sea cut the sky into 2 halves, and slowly pressed toward him. In this vertical sea that cut the sky and the earth, one could see a whirlpool larger than a mountain, and could see the silent and helpless seabirds flying around, and could see death. Then the sea fell down. Ning Ke also fell down. He fell heavily on the mountain path, frowned in pain, and spat out a mouthful of blood. The small lake in front of the road was still calm, with only a few ripples. A calm but proud voice came from the depths of the mountain fog. This kind of pride was different from the pride of Prince Longqing, who pretended to be indifferent. The owner of the voice did not bother to hide his pride, nor did he deliberately show his pride. His pride came from the strength of his heart, which came from his nature, and did not make people feel disgusted at all. It is said that the handwriting on the cliff of the mountain path was engraved by the predecessors of the academy. After the inhibition is opened, those who intend to break through the inhibition will have to endure the pain and power hidden in the talisman, and then the pain and power of the mountain path will be greater. The calm and proud voice continued, "Many years ago, I fought with eldest senior brother. Although you all know eldest senior brother's temperament, and he wouldn't really be ruthless to me, I still couldn't beat him. So, in a fit of anger, I crushed the mold that teacher used to make plum cakes. So, teacher also got angry, and then made a cruel decision to punish me by walking on the mountain path." There were many reasons for the exclamations. Some were amazed by eldest brother's strength, some were amazed by second brother's strength, and he could crush the steel cake mold carved with talismans by the headmaster of the academy with his bare hands. Some were amazed by second brother's audacity to make the headmaster of the academy have no plum cakes to eat. When I walked on the mountain path that year, of course, I caused a much greater movement than this guy. In the end, I only fell to the ground when the Milky Way shattered and meteorites flew everywhere. But it is not easy for this guy to cause the wrath of the sea. Someone in the fog expressed his approval, and someone sighed and said, "But it seems that the more pain he can endure, the more pain he has to endure. This guy is too unlucky." Unlucky? Someone asked angrily. Unlucky. That person hurriedly explained. None of you have seen youngest uncle. Only eldest brother and I have seen him. Second senior brother's mood eased up slightly, and he spoke proudly as if he felt that meeting the youngest uncle was something to be proud of. Youngest uncle once said that fate itself is a very cruel guy. After seeing the scene at the bridgehead, he thought of a certain possibility: this mountain path would bring people back. The reason was very simple. Even if there was a bottomless abyss or a soul-devouring evil beast in front of the mountain road, the three climbers, including Xia Chengyun, might not be able to climb up, but there was no reason for the three of them to give up climbing at the bridgehead. Moreover, the expressions on their faces did not seem to be tragic after some kind of torment, but more like a kind of futility of being lost. The question was, why would the mountain path behind the bridge bring people back to the original spot? This was the problem that Ning Kai needed to solve now. He closed his eyes and stood silently under the mountain path behind the bridge. His hand stretched out of his sleeves and gently felt the aura in the wind. The seemingly forward mountain path could only bring people back to the original spot. If the secret could not be solved, then the climbers could only walk up the mountain path again and again in vain, and then walk back to the original spot again and again in despair. The three low-spirited climbers at the bridgehead finally gave up in such a boring and desperate cycle. At this time, they saw Ning Kai, their companion, standing in front of the mountain path and thinking that he would try to walk up the mountain path again like they did before, and then walk back a moment later with a perplexed look. They could not help showing sympathy and some sarcasm on their faces. There was no sympathy, pity or sarcasm on Xia Chengyun's face. Ning Kai was not shocked by this magical mountain path, but when he saw clearly the appearance of Ning Kai walking back from the mountain path, he was suddenly shocked speechless. After the entrance exam of the academy, Xia Chengyun had always regarded Ning Kai as his strongest opponent in the days of continuous climbing. However, after the semester exam, he confirmed that he had overestimated this young soldier from the border town. In the following time, Ning Kai was excluded and neglected by the academy students. Although he did not add insult to injury, he had indeed forgotten this former opponent. When the second floor of the academy opened, his goal was Prince Long Qing. He even thought that there would be many other strong opponents in the course of the exam, but he just did not think of Ning Quebec. Because he thought that he had defeated Ning Kai, then why should he pay more attention to him? What qualifications did a defeated opponent who had fallen in front of him have to distract him? Until today at the bridgehead, when he saw the figure on the mountain path and Ning Kai walking down the mountain path, his heart suddenly tightened. Only then did he realize that he had not defeated Ning Kai at all, and even maybe he had never seen this classmate clearly. Xia Chengyun had personally experienced what kind of pain the mountain path at the other end of the bridge would bring to the climbers. At this moment, he could naturally think that a person who could survive that part of the mountain path, how could he call himself sick and give up the exam just because of a bet? A more saddening inference appeared in his heart. In the past 6 months in the academy, Ning Kai did not make any excuses and did not try to challenge him again. Perhaps it was not because he was guilty, but because he did not pay attention to him at all. Looking at Ning Kai, who bowed his head and pondered under the mountain path, Xia Chengyun struggled to stand up with the help of the tree. After a moment of hesitation, he looked at Ning Ke and said, "The mountain path is fake. The primordial qi is flowing naturally, and it is impossible to find the passage. You can't pass it." Ning Ke opened his eyes, but did not turn back or answer. He just stared at the mountain path in front of him. In the past year, he had read too many books on cultivation in the old library. When it came to the breadth of vision, neither Xia Chengyun nor others could be compared with him. After walking around the mysterious mountain road just now, he judged that the mountain road had been set with a tactical formation, which was closely integrated with the cliff and road stones. Because of its harmony, it was powerful. It was a pity that tactical arrays, like talisman Taoism, were the most complicated and difficult skills to learn in the cultivation world. Even Chen Pipi did not know much about them. Ning Ke had only read some books and knew some basic knowledge of tactical arrays. He had not even learned a little bit, let alone breaking an array. Ning Ke thought for a while and put his hands hanging outside his sleeves in front of his chest. His fingertips crossed each other to make a mind bridge. He urged his psyche power to output through the snow mountain and ocean of qi, feeling the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth in the mountain path, and then slowly walked up. After a long time, Ning Ke's figure appeared on the mountain path again. There was still no expression on his face. After walking to the bridgehead, he continued to look back at the sloping mountain path in a daze. Previously, when he walked the mountain path, his main purpose was to feel the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth in the mountain path and try to find a passage outside the tactical matrix. However, he found that the tactical matrix on the mountain path was really magical. When climbers tried to use their psyche power to control the qi of heaven and earth to feel the passage outside the tactical matrix, once the qi of heaven and earth moved by climbers came into contact with the tactical matrix, it would automatically cause some very subtle changes in the tactical matrix. These seemingly subtle changes were like cliffs to climbers. What was more magical was that the more powerful the climber's psyche power was, the more abundant the qi of heaven and earth they could control. Once they touched the tactical array, the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth covering the real mountain path would be more violent and directly destroy the passages the climbers had just touched. That was to say, the more powerful the person's psyche power was, the more abundant the qi of heaven and earth they could control, and the easier it was for them to find the real mountain path hidden in the tactical array. At the same time, they would quickly change the tactical array and cover the real mountain path again. If a climber wanted to pass through the mountain path covered by the formation, there were only 3 ways. First, you had to be fast enough. When you found the real mountain path, you had to turn into a flash of lightning and fly over before the formation was triggered. Second, your state was high enough. You didn't need to use the qi of heaven and earth to touch and feel. You only needed to use your psyche power to see through the tactical array and see the flow of the primordial qi in the mountain path, and then find the road. Third, your psyche power was strong enough to control the qi of heaven and earth to accurately feel the passages in the tactical array. But at the same time, you had to ensure that the qi of heaven and earth could not be sensed by the tactical array and change it. There must be cultivators who could trigger faster than the tactical array, such as those legendary sages who entered the limitless state. But that person was definitely not Ning Quebec. There must be cultivators who had a high enough state to see through the tactical array, such as Prince Long Qing who had entered the fog on the mountainside. But that person was definitely not Ning Quebec. For Ning Ke and the cultivators at the bridgehead who were lost and desperate, they could only choose the third way. But if they analyzed it carefully, they would know that the third way was basically impossible. They were like blind people who could not see. The primordial qi that formed the tactical array on the mountain path was like a maze made of something softer than cream. A blind person could only use his hands to touch the cream walls. He had to touch them carefully and attentively to find the passage of the cream maze. At the same time, he could not let the cream walls change shape. Because once they changed shape, the maze would change again. To do all this, the blind person had to have the most gentle hands in the world. This pair of gentle hands could catch the wind in the forest without the wind knowing, take off the clothes of a woman on the bed without the woman waking up, and brush the ink and sweat in the inkstone without a speck of black. For cultivators, this pair of gentle hands was the chi of heaven and earth that their psyche power could mobilize. They had to ensure that the chi of heaven and earth they mobilized was accurate and gentle enough to control the fine needles to embroider, to make the flowers stick to the bees, and to make the bees dance on the tips of the needles. Only in this way could they try to do what they wanted. However, which cultivator in the world would be so bored to the point that he had to forcefully mobilize the chi of heaven and earth to make the chi of heaven and earth weak and gentle, and then spend so much effort to practice embroidery that was not beneficial to cultivation? The person who set up the tactical array on the mountain path must be an old pervert. Ning Ke looked at the winding mountain path in front of him and made a judgment of the tactical array master of the academy in his heart. Then he put his hand into his bosom and touched the extremely thin and cool pile of things. He thought silently, but I seem to be a pervert too. Just like when he was on the mountain path on the other side of the bridge, he sighed when he looked at the sky with slightly wet eyes. These years of hardship seem to have become a gift from Lord Haotian today. Normal cultivators absolutely could not use the third method to pass the mountain path, but Ning Ke seemed to be able to use it. Although he might not be able to pass, at least he maintained that wonderful possibility. Since he was very young, Ning Ke would constantly meditate whether he was eating, sleeping, in a daze, or writing, as long as he had time. However, he did not open the acupoints of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi, and the psyche power obtained from meditation had been accumulated in his sense of perception. As time went by, it accumulated into a vast lake. Until last year, he finally opened the acupoints, and it became his biggest support. With such a strong psyche power, only an idiot would deliberately make the chi of heaven and earth that he could mobilize weak and gentle. Ning Ke did not want to, but he was different from other ordinary cultivators. He could not cultivate, but his fate was changed by several adventures. In the end, the ocean of chi and mountain of snow in his body only barely opened 10 acupoints, and the chi of heaven and earth that he could perceive was pitifully little. Because it was little, it was gentle. As for manipulating the chi of heaven and earth to do embroidery, this seemingly perverted and boring action was in fact what Ning Ke had been doing every night in Lin 47th Street for the past 6 months. The chi of heaven and earth that he could manipulate was too little. He knew that it was extremely difficult to win in a battle with this, so he increasingly wanted to control it more meticulously. Under the candlelight every night, under the curious gaze of Sang Sang, the lad who had finally stepped into the cultivation world kept meditating and sensing the chi of heaven and earth in the room. He controlled the leaves, the wooden basin, the candlestick, the brush, the black, the paper, the inkstone, the toilet, and everything else. Until today, he had always been stuck in the no-doubt state and had not yet found his natal item. He still could not control the flying sword to fly randomly like those sword masters and kill people invisibly in the air. But he could control the hundreds of fallen leaves under the tree in the courtyard to fly to the stove and pile up into a hill. He could control the wooden basin to move from one end of the bed to the other end of the bed like a fat doll, which made Sang Sang applaud excitedly. He could control the brush to fall slowly into the inkstone and then lift it up to write clumsily on the paper like a beginner. Ning Ke practiced silently and painstakingly just like when he learned to kill beasts and people in Min Mountain. He practiced controlling the chi of heaven and earth as if he had waved the knife tens of thousands of times. The fallen leaves flying in the courtyard, the water flowing in the room, the ink spilling on the desk and the white wall, the stench of the overturned toilet, and the sweat of Sang Sang when she cleaned up the mess were all his proofs. This method was very bitter, which was the meaning of painstaking practice. This method was very clumsy, which was the meaning of hard work to make up for. This method was very perverted, which ordinary people could not think of, let alone do. That was why even God was moved by it. Xia Qingyun leaned against the tree and looked at Ning Ke under the mountain road. He said bitterly, Ning Ke, I don't know why you have been hiding your strength. Maybe you look down on me, but I can see that you are the same as me, in the no-doubt state. Only those in the see-through state can master the law of the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth. You want to walk through this mountain road, unless there is a miracle. Before entering the academy, Mistress Jian once told me that the academy is a place to create miracles. Ning Ke took out a thin layer of silver foil from his arms, tore it into countless pieces with his palms, and then sprinkled them in front of him. The mountain wind blew from the valley under the bridge and whistled through the mountain path, blowing those thin and seemingly weightless pieces of silver foil in all directions. They fluttered like countless silver leaves and then fell silently on the mountain path. It is a miracle that I am alive, so I will make it a miracle every day I am alive. After saying this, Ning Ke looked at the clear silver road in his sense of perception and stepped up. When he walked up the mountain road, he seemed to be in high spirits, but then his movements became strange and clumsy. He lowered his body, squatted down very slowly against the tree, and then carefully moved 2 steps forward. Then he put his right hand into the cliff, turned back with difficulty, and took another step forward. People in the academy looked at the sloping mountain road in the twilight, and suddenly someone exclaimed, I see it, it is Ning Ke. Someone sneered and said, what is he doing? He lifts his leg. Is he going to lie on the ground and crawl through a dog hole? Zhong Dajuan gently waved his folding fan and sneered, he is really good at crawling through a dog hole to escape. Ning Ke was the last to climb the mountain, but he actually held on for such a long time, which had already exceeded most people's expectations, especially those academy classmates who thought they knew him well. They were even more shocked, and inevitably envied and hated him. Chang Zhengming frowned slightly, looking at Ning Ke who was struggling to move forward on the mountain road. His movements seemed extremely ridiculous, and suddenly remembered his conversation with Ning Ke in the academy last year. He muttered to himself, I don't know how long he can hold on. He is just a brute. Zhong Dajuan snapped his folding fan and said bitterly. Situilan turned her head to look at him, and then coldly looked around at the classmates with complicated expressions. She sneered and said, he has surpassed the 6 students in the course of magic skills, and is the rightful number 1 in the academy. Are you still not convinced? The academy students were silent. On the sloping mountain road, Ning Ke's psyche power spread out of his body, mobilizing the thin qi of heaven and earth to sense the silver foil fragments scattered on the mountain road, and then used the silver foil to find the channel of the tactical array in the most gentle way. Ning Ke had not been able to determine his natal item, but there was no doubt that in this world, besides Sang Sang, the thing that could resonate with his psyche power the most was still silver. Because exchanging gold required the official notarization, he had not tried gold yet. With the help of the silver foil, he squatted down, got up, and climbed obliquely on the quiet mountain road clumsily. However, at least he was not taken back to the bridgehead by the mountain road again. Xia Qingyun stood at the bridgehead and looked at the mountain road with a perplexed expression. He could not figure out what method Ning Ke had used to surpass him and walk on the mountain road that he could not pass no matter how hard he tried. Looking at the comical figure that was getting farther and farther on the mountain road, he could not help but think of the lonely figure that he could occasionally see on the meadow in the past 6 months when he and Wuxia walked by the lake, the figure that was forgotten by the academy for half a year. He thought of his pride after the semester exam, and the figure that disappeared in the rain-shielding corridor. He clutched his right chest tightly and looked at Ning Ke at the end of the mountain road, shouting painfully and unwillingly, Ning Ke, you can't surpass Prince Long Qing. He curiously thought, walked through the wooden door, walked up the steps, and disappeared in the thick fog on the mountainside. It was quiet in the academy, not even a bird or a person. An academy student was slightly pale. He looked at the mountain and murmured, "Luck, it must be luck." Zhong Dajuan tightly held the handle of the folding fan and said in a hoarse voice, "This guy, how many things has he hidden? He is too insidious." No one paid attention to them, including Situilan. Everyone in the academy looked at the mountain and the mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. Although they could not see the figure of the academy student, they still looked over there. The academy student was the second one to walk into the mountain fog. Some people even began to guess that maybe the guy could reach the top of the mountain before Prince Longqing. 7,000 words. Writing and reading should be relaxing and happy things. I'm having fun writing now. For example, the last 3 chapters, especially the part about opening the wooden door today, I'm having fun while writing. I hope everyone can have fun reading it. I'll work hard. Please give me your recommendation votes and monthly votes to encourage me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.